Welcome to MOOC's online course on Introduction to Indian Art and Appreciation. Today is the third module of the first section known as Introducing Indian Art, and this module is on architecture. Well, Indian architecture manifests itself in varied ways. There are cave architectures, there are structural temples, you find huge stupas, you find forts and fortresses, palaces, residential buildings, so on and so forth. And it is known that Indian architecture is as old as the history of Indian civilization. However, the legacy of Indian architecture goes back to one of the earliest civilizational periods of India known as Indus Valley Civilization, and interestingly, the kind of examples of architecture we get there is hardly anything to do with either temple or cave architecture or stupa. Of course, remains of houses, dwellings, residential buildings have been found, but perhaps the most striking aspect of Indus Valley Civilization architecture is with regard to their innovation in terms of building not just one or two architectural pieces, but a whole city, and not one, more than one. And two of those cities are very, very well known to us, known as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. So, when you look at the ruins of Indus Valley Civilization, whether at Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, you find within the remains, amidst lot of brick structures, lot of small little walls, lot of brick barriers, various remains of architectural spaces built to satisfy very specific purposes. In fact, we must remember that throughout the history of Indian art, let us look at the 5,000 years of history, this is a very exceptional example of architecture where you get the ruins of one whole city. Now, beside the two very famous ones, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, of late we have also begun to discover ruins of Indus Valley Civilization cities also this part of our country in India, for example in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, and one particular site called Dholavira in Gujarat has emerged as another very important site, if not as big as Mohenjo-daro Harappa, but as rich as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, of course. So, the very first image of the ruins of Indus Valley Civilization gives us an impression of a huge city, a huge urban setup, and obviously the demands of an urban life required the people of Indus Valley Civilization to come up with extremely sophisticated technology. May not be what we understand technology in the modern terms, but the kind of technology they required to develop to meet the demands of an urban civilization, and they did it. So, the ruins of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are testimonies to their technological development, their technological know-how, as well as their architectural know-how, and of course, their impeccable knowledge of city planning. In fact, apart from the remains of house, building, dwelling places, storage buildings, granaries, we have also come across one of the major attractions of Indus Valley civilization in terms of its city planning and architectural innovation, and that is known as the Great Bath. Now, before we talk about the Great Bath, let us look at least some of the significant features of the architectural ruins that we have discovered in Indus Valley civilization sites. Now, it appears that the houses in Indus Valley civilization, and particularly in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, were of different sizes, varying from a palatial building to very small houses with only 2 small rooms. Most of the houses had a well to draw water from, a bathroom and a covered drain in the street. And it is known that Indus Valley civilization, and particularly Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, had one of the oldest drainage system in the history of the world. And most of the houses were probably furnished with paved floors and were provided with doors and windows. The roofs were made of mud, reed and wood. This is just a very brief description of the evidences that we have found in these 2 cities in terms of architectural and city planning. Coming to the Great Bath, once again the Great Bath definitely served the purpose of a public space, and to maintain that public space, in order to make the public space not only active but a usable space, they have looked at all the meticulous details of an architectural complex with a kind of knowledge and understanding which is enviable even today. In fact, the Great Bath is considered to be the earliest public water tank. Interesting. The tank measures approximately, now look at the dimensions. The tank measures approximately 12 meters north-south and 7 meters wide with a maximum depth of 2.4 meters. That's a huge space. 2 staircases lead down to the tank from the north and south, and small sockets at the edges of the stairs are thought to have held wooden planks of trees. Look at the technological details they have gone into in order to make this Great Bath an user-friendly space. Now, at the foot of the stairs is a small ledge with a brick edging that extends the entire width of the pool. There are many such details found in this Great Bath, which are still being studied by the architects and historians from all over the world, and they are yet to fathom the fact that how did 5,000 years back people could actually come up with technical innovations of this scale. Now, we can move further and look at a few examples of one of the major categories of Indian architecture known as cave architectures. Now, this of course does not mean that straight away they were using the caves either as a dwelling place or as a religious place. No. Most of the what we know or call cave architectures are actually rock cut or scooped out spaces from living rocks, solid living rocks. Now, that is a kind of incredible task, because you have a monolithic rock, solid rock, no cave, no natural cave, then the tools that you have at your disposal are very simple, chisel and hammer. With that, you start scooping out portions of rock from a solid, inert, huge rock or a mountain, and you create caves with architectural details, with interior details, including even pillars, ceilings, beautiful walls, all with carvings, intricate carvings, and later on you also have, like for example in Ajanta, not only carvings on the pillars or on the gateways, but also paintings. So, cave architecture, this whole tradition of cave architecture in India emerged as a very important architectural tradition, despite the fact that building or carving a cave architecture was definitely a difficult task, which engaged not only lot of labor, lot of time, but also lot of energy and a very clear conception of the entire architectural design. Because we need to remember that when we go further down the chronological line and look at what we call structural temple architecture, there you always have the option to correct, to revise, to go for certain remedy if there is any mistake. But as far as these cave architectures are concerned, you can't rectify your mistake. Every hammering, every chiseling has to be correct, perfect, and it should be the last chiseling. So, this makes the whole task of building or scooping or carving a cave architecture immensely difficult, but still it went on. This tradition was alive for almost 1000 years in India, and it is interesting also to note that most of the cave architectures belong to Buddhist religious faith. Buddhist monks, with the help of probably hundreds of laborers and carvers and architects, made these cave architectures mostly either to dwell, to be used as places where they would live, or as places of worship. Those cave architectures, I mean Buddhist cave architectures, which are meant or built as a worshipping place, are known as Chaitya caves, and those Buddhist cave architectures are meant to be used as a dwelling place are known as viharas. So, basically in India, as far as the Buddhist cave architecture is concerned, we have two kinds of cave architectures: vihara, where monks used to live, and chaityas, where monks used to pray, worship. So, the moment you find an icon, and in most cases it would be an image of Buddha inside a Buddhist cave architecture, immediately you can say that this is a Chaitya cave. And if you find caves without any icon, without any image of Buddha, it has to be a vihara, where monks used to live and practice Buddhism. Now, this image is interestingly one of the earliest example of cave architecture, and that is from Bihar. Once again, remember what we were discussing in last two modules, geography and chronology. Though most of the famous, well-known and most of the clusters of cave architectures are found in Western India and particularly in Maharashtra, one of the earliest cave architectures, Buddhist cave architectures known as Lomosh Rishi cave, is interestingly found not in Maharashtra, but in Bihar. This is that. This is now, the next one is also an example of a pretty early example of cave architecture, Buddhist cave architecture, but this is again found not in Bihar, not in the eastern part of India, but in the western part of India, in Maharashtra. And this is also pretty early, let us say 2nd or 3rd century AD. But by then, the architectural ideas and the architectural abilities, the technological facilities have improved to an extent where the carvers could actually make two-storied cave architectures with lot of details, ornamentations, and if we have a chance to go inside and see the interior of the caves have also become very gorgeous, very elaborate, and it is unbelievable once you are inside any cave that you are actually inside the womb of a mountain. This is another example of another cave from Western India. Now, this image, this particular photograph gives us an idea or an impression that each of these caves, these carved caves, are actually built inside the womb, as it were, of a huge mountain within the solid rock. And this makes these cave architectures kind of marvels of the history of architecture. This is another incredible historical site in the history of Indian art, very well known as Ajanta. And here, from this distance, you can see not one or two, but a series of caves carved one after the other of varying sizes and also in different scales. And this was built in 5th century AD. Most of the caves in Ajanta are built in 5th and 6th century AD, and just 2 or 3 were built in the 1st century AD. So, by 5th century AD, these Buddhist cave architects knew how to handle elaborate spaces and very decorative interiors as well as exteriors. This is from south, talking about the geographical expansion which we discussed in the last module. While we were talking about the Western Indian Buddhist cave architectures, the very next slide that we are looking at now is from south, from Karnataka, a place known as Badami, and interestingly this is not a Buddhist cave, it is a Hindu cave architectures built in 7th and 8th century AD. So, though it was started by the Buddhist faith, but it was adopted by the Hindu religious sects as well, and that is the reason why we find some of the exquisite and wonderful Hindu cave architectures as well. For example, in Badami, the image that you are looking at right now, and another very well known example of Hindu cave architectures will be found in Ellora, on which we have a separate module altogether in the later part of our course. This is Ellora, just to give you an impression of the fact that slowly, gradually, cave architecture, or let us say the cave architects, are now able to handle huge spaces. They are able to manage massive rocks, and not only to conceive, but also actually to execute not just an interior of the cave, but they were able to now scoop out huge temples out of these mountains and rocks with elaborate designs, ornamentations and sculptures on their walls. We move away from cave architecture and begin to look at a few examples of the next very important category of Indian architecture, known as structural temples. So, the distinction is very clear, whereas in cave architecture you find that the architectures are actually carved out from a solid existing rock or a huge mountain. In case of the structural temples, the architecture is built up, literally built up unit by unit, probably in most cases by using bricks, and in certain cases they have also used stone slabs. Whatever it is, it has to be built up. So, elevation now becomes a very important aspect for these structural temples. The image we are looking at is considered to be one of the earliest examples of structural temples in Indian art history. Though this is from Gupta period, that is as late as 5th century AD, and this is located at a place called Bhitargaon, very close to present day Kanpur. And you can see already that the architects, they are now able to handle, conceive and finally execute and materialize their idea of a structured temple in a very perfectionist way. They have already perfected the art of structural temples in 5th century AD in this small temple at Bhitargaon. This is also a very early example of a structural temple found at Sanchi. though originally Sanchi belongs to Shunga period, but because that site was active over a long period of time. So, when or during the Gupta period, when the Gupta kings found this place still active, so instead of building more stupas, which was the main objective of the Shunga dynasty kings as far as the Sanchi was concerned, the Gupta kings at the same site, they started building structural temples again in 5th century AD. Quickly, it is that same place at Sanchi. We also get to see stupa, and stupa is another form of architecture which is neither a kind of space where you can go inside like a cave or a structural temple. Usually caves have a huge interior, at least quite a big interior. In most of the caves you find interiors. In structural temples, if the interiors are not big, but at least you will find an inner sanctum, or what in Indian term is known as Garbha Griha. But in case of stupa, stupa is a peculiar architecture which is absolutely solid, huge, big, with no space or no possibility to go inside this circular dome. You can of course have what they call a circumambulation. You can make around the stupa. You can look at the railings. You can look at the gateway which is known as Torana, but you can't go or enter inside the solid stupa. Stupa is found in more or less similar or slightly varying shapes, not only in India, but also in other parts of South India, Southeast Asia also, where Buddhism spread and Buddhism became a very popular religion later on. All along, the structural temple, the tradition of structural temple also gradually improved, and it kept improving itself not only in terms of its technological or architectural know-how, but also in terms of its design. That is very important. So, this is one example, not very early, but still an early example of a structural temple in Bhubaneswar, where you see that now the structural temple does not mean just one simple block of building, but it can also have an entrance, it can also have a surrounding wall, it can actually develop itself into a huge complex. And this is what most of the architects of structural temple in ancient India were looking at. Not just to make one simple block of building, but to develop the space into a huge temple complex. The one that we are looking at right now is known as Mukteshwara temple in Bhubaneswar, Orissa. Next one is in South India, in Karnataka, known as the Aihole, Durga temple at Aihole. Here it is more or less following the principles of structural temple, but look at the shape, a very peculiar shape, where you have a kind of circular movement all around the building, not a rectangular shape. So, experiments now are happening all over India, right from 5th and 6th century AD onwards, with regard to how you conceive, design and build up the structural temples in different ways. And then we come to extremely elaborately designed temple architectures like this one, known as the Lingaraj temple in Bhubaneswar, Orissa. As I was saying, that now these structural temples are evidences of this idea that these are no more conceived as just mere blocks of buildings, but as elaborate architectural complex. Hence, various kinds of details are coming up in order to fit the bill. And we also have very peculiarly shaped architectural specimens from isolated places like Orcha. They are very royal, I mean they are not strictly so religious, They are like palaces belonging to the kings of Orcha. So, apart from religious buildings, in the history of Indian architecture, we can also expect to see non-religious secular buildings as well, like palaces, havelis, and various kinds of architectural structures without any religious purpose. In fact, Hampi in Karnataka would be one such wonderful site to visit, where you can see the coexistence of religious architectures and non-religious secular architectures within one single place. This temple, known as the Virupaksha temple, is located at Hampi, and beside this temple there are also several innumerable architectural pieces which are not religious at all, but meant to be used in a social life, in the secular life, in the royal life of the people. Apart from the temple architectures, cave architectures and religious architectures, we also have this kind of, what to say, political architectures. I mean, these are not religious, but these are meant to protect the kingdom, which are generally called or known as forts. This is one such example of fort, Kumbhalgarh Fort. This is of course very well known, Agra Fort. Again, this is another fort very well known as Daulatabad Fort in Maharashtra. And then of course, we have this wonderful tradition of Islamic architecture in India, and one of the most famous and world renowned examples is of course Taj Mahal. But not only Taj Mahal, throughout this period, that is from Sultanate period onwards through the Mughal period, on which we will have a separate module very soon, we find some of the most marvelous and most intricate architectural pieces, either in the form of a mausoleum or in the form of a Buland Darwaza like this one in Fatehpur Sikri, or in the form of a tomb like Gol Gumbaj, or in the form of a beautiful palatial building called Jahaz Mahal in Mandu, or in the form of what is known as Bada Imambara in Lucknow, or simple palaces can also be considered as worth studying when we are looking at the history of Indian architecture, which are neither a kind of let us say testimonies of huge political authority, they are not reflections of great religious authority, but they are simple palaces belonging to very powerful and of course rich feudal lords, like this one, Padmanabhapuram Palace in Kerala. And of course, India and particularly the Western India, Rajasthan and Gujarat have number of these beautiful buildings, architectural, worth looking at architectural pieces known as Havelis. And I would suggest, given a chance, all of you must visit at least one place in Rajasthan called Shekhawati in order to see the elaborate, decorative and innovative examples of secular architecture which kind of draw our attention, and not only in terms of their architectural variety and design, but also in terms of their zeal of the patrons, the owners, to keep on building beautiful Havelis throughout 17th, 18th and 19th century. And what we are not discussing, not mentioning today, but I must let you know that whenever we get a chance, we should also look at that is the rural architecture, because throughout India from north to south, from east to west, we have wonderful variety of rural vernacular architectural examples. Thank you.